Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
Ancient shaman excelled in a skill modern people are just coming to recognize, that of dream walking. Can anyone learn to navigate the dreamscape? If so, what mysteries will we find there? Mission Evolution Radio Show is coming to you around the world on the X-Zone TV channel, xztv.ca. With us this hour to explore the value and power of walking in our dreams is Norma J. Burton. Norma is a counselor with a degree in comparative religion, focusing on Buddhist and shamanic traditions, who specializes in trauma healing, shadow work, and dream analysis. Having apprenticed with indigenous elders for over 30 years, she founded the Journey to Completion Institute of Ancient Healing Arts and the Circle of Trust Healing Center. With her daughter, Nisha Burton Norma co-authored the book Navigating Liminal Realms Psychonavigation Skills for Lucid Dreaming, Trance Journeys, and Altered States. Her website, normaburton.com. Norma, thank you so much for joining us on Mission Evolution.
Thanks for having me.
So, how did you first become interested in dreams?
Well, at a very young age, because I was a dreamer in the sense of having lots of interesting dreams from a young age. And then it became a study for me. By the time I got to college, I was interested in the psychology of religious experience and what was going on with us humans to have such an amazing part of our lives that every human has. There has to be some great purpose in all of us having a dream time.
Yeah, and we spend how much of our time dreaming, and yet we kind of ignore it for the most part, don't we?
Right. Well, our Western culture, unfortunately, has squelched our interest in it, claiming that ordinary reality is the most important thing, and making children get up so early to go to school, and having people not ask about what did you dream or value the dream time, and even say, oh, you're just dreaming, or don't be a daydreamer, or things like that. So, right, our culture really squelched the idea that dreams were so important. But other cultures around the world have kept alive the practice of dreaming and dreaming in community, like the Senoi Dream people, or different groups that I've worked with in South America and Central America. They really teach their children to value their dreams and know that very important part of our lives is going on in the dream time.
It seems like such a loss that we aren't paying more attention. Can dreams be precognitive?
Oh, precognitive, right? Prophesying what might happen in the future. As you start paying attention to your dreams, you will very likely have precognitive experiences. I often have, almost every day actually, I might dream of something at night, and then I'm speaking to one of my clients during the day, and that whole subject matter will come up. So I think we're supposed to have precognitive experiences to show us that, for one thing, time is not as linear as we think. Physicists have actually been showing that it's cyclical, that we might be aware in various dimensions of time and space, not just this one linear one. So, right, precognition's an interesting subject. Maybe people have had deja vu experiences, where you feel like you've been somewhere or seen something before. So the brain is vast, right? And it really does give us access to multidimensional time and space realities if we start to grow our awareness of it.
It sounds like there's a lot of complexity in dreams, like a lot of different kinds. How did you learn to do dream analysis?
One thing I emphasize about dream analysis is that there are lots of dictionaries of meanings of symbols in dreams out there, and that's helpful at first, but you really have to figure out your own dream symbols and start to pay attention to what we call dream signs, which are repetitive dream symbols that happen over and over again. For example, dreaming about water, or dreaming about not having finished school, or different things like that. So you've got to figure out what your dream signs mean for you. But in terms of becoming a dream analyst, well, I've studied as a Jungian psychologist and studied the mind and psychology and depth psychology and the meaning of symbols. Semiotics is the whole field of the meaning of symbols. So I've delved deeply into what symbols can represent to humans, but also I've just been with so many humans over a period of about 40 years, working with people with their dream time, both through their nighttime dreams and then through drumming journeys and through lucid dreaming, hearing the symbols over and over again and coming to have a deep understanding of what the dream might be saying. And the important thing is to value every little part of the dream and ask yourself questions. Who does that person in the dream represent to me? Why is it that person? What elements are coming through the symbol of that person? And also, you in the dream could be every person in the dream. Some aspect of you could be every person. So things like that. There's a practice of deeply questioning and valuing every little thing that the dream is showing you.
Well, how can you tell when you're dreaming something that's symbols or literal? Like maybe a precognitive dream can be fairly literal. How can you tell the difference?
It's such a good question, right? Because sometimes people dream of dying and they get really afraid that that means they're going to die. But studies have been done that show that 99.9% of the time when you dream about dying, you are not going to physically die. It's not about your physical death. It's about a symbolic death of your ego, some aspect of yourself, of your identity, or of your life changes that are happening. So that's such a good question. How do you know if it's about really what's going to happen in ordinary reality or a symbolic message? Well, sometimes it is about what's going to happen in ordinary reality in that precognitive sense, but a lot of times we have very symbolic dreams about the world, like we dream about tidal waves coming or wars happening or something, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to happen that way, but you're tuning in perhaps to a consciousness of fear or changes that are in the human consciousness, like in the collective unconscious. But for the most part, we are to take the dreams in a symbolic way and try to understand them symbolically for your life right now. And what kind of message are you needing to get about your life? Like, for example, if you dream about a tidal wave, water represents emotions. So maybe your dream is telling you that you have an overwhelm of emotions going on about something. So like that, it's best to try to interpret it about the message for your own life. But some of us are a Nostradamus type person, that are getting messages for the collective, for things that are really happening.
Is it an either or kind of thing, or can they cross dress? In other words, can a dream be both symbolic and literal at the same time?
Oh, definitely. I like that. Can they cross dress to be both kinds of dreams? Yes, I, for example, had these 4 dreams of a lifetime. And the way I knew they were the same dream is because they started the same way each time. And years later, I read in the book Black Elk Speaks about the native elder Black Elk that he had 4 dreams, and that a shaman teacher is often given these 4 prophetic dreams about their lifespan and what will be happening on Earth during their lifetime. So I had these 4 dreams, and they very much related to my own life, but they also related to the collective. And just to give a little tidbit about it, the dreams all started the same way, which is very odd. A very odd sight that a whole group of us were standing outside, and we saw that there was not just one sun in the sky, but two suns. So it's interesting because through different spiritual lore around the world, there is this phenomenon of the two suns appearing. And one thing that's said about it is that the center of the Milky Way galaxy, which the Egyptians called Isis, is as bright as a second sun, but that we have, on Earth, we've been under a dark meteorite rift between us and the center of the Milky Way galaxy until around 2012, which is what the Mayans called the end of time as we know it. So that dark rift supposedly moved away, or we moved out from under it, and we now are receiving a much brighter light from the center of the Milky Way galaxy. So who knows, maybe someday we will look up and actually see that visibly, right? But we take dreams in the deep symbolism and try to understand them and then live into them. And sometimes they really do come true in ordinary reality. But you have to hold it lightly and not get too attached to that. Sometimes people, I think, get overly attached, don't you think, to this is a prophecy and this is going to come true on this day, and then it doesn't happen that way. So we have to hold it humbly and lightly, but sometimes they do completely manifest in ordinary reality.
Well, can sometimes, you were talking about, different timelines, different shifts that we can go through or are going through at this point, and that we have more control over that than what we think. Can the fact that we had a dream about it and our intention, it changes our intention, can that then change outcome?
Oh, that's a great question, right? Because our perception of reality does affect reality. So a lot of the spiritual work that I teach in my Journey to Completion method is about how we get in stuck perceptions of reality. We get conditioned into them, we get traumatized into them, into certain ways of perceiving reality. There are so many studies going on now in the psychedelic research about how we get into these canals, they call it CANALS, of ruts in our brain, and that psychedelics help to open up those stuck places and create neuroplasticity, or an ability for our neurons to fire in more directions and thus see more, perceive more. So yes, we do get stuck, and we can then heal our perception so that then we can perceive and therefore create different realities. So in all my work through the years with the Huichol, that's what they were deeply teaching us. Before we would do deep work with them, they'd have us make this symbolic yarn structure that was in the form of a diamond with a hole in the middle, made out of yarn, and it was called the God's Eye.
Right. Yeah, we're going to pick up with the God's Eye on the other side of a station break.
But
Norma and I will return very shortly, so don't you go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. What does shamanism have to do with my dreams? With us this hour discussing altered states of consciousness is Norma Burton. Norma is the author of Navigating Liminal Realms Psychonavigation Skills for Lucid Dreaming and Trance Journeys and Altered States. Her website, normaburton.com. Norma, your bio says you focused your studies on Buddhist and shamanic traditions. Most people don't associate the two. Is there shamanism in Buddhist practices?
oh, that's a great question. Buddhist Buddhist practices are vast. There are many types of Buddhism. I really wanted to live in a Buddhist country in my youth so that I could experience it firsthand. And in Japan, where I lived, there are over 360 types of Buddhism there.
My goodness.
As we know, there's Tibetan Buddhism and Mahayana, Hinayana, different major types of Buddhism too. And in Japan, I discovered that there was a certain blend of Buddhism that had blended with mountain shamanism when it first came to Japan. That was called Shugendo. So that's just one example of the blending of Buddhism and shamanism. But Tibetan Buddhism is very blended with the mountain shamanism of Tibet. So yes, the blend. But what that means underneath of that is that it's working with the mind, right? Buddhism is about clarifying the mind and working intricately with how our minds work so that we are developing a consciousness about our perceptions and deconstructing our perceptions so that we can actually perceive more clearly and get to Tathagata, which is a word for suchness or reality, such as it is. And in shamanism, we're working with the same thing because humans are taken on journeys into their minds through the drumming journeys, through psychedelic plants, so that we can deconstruct our stuck places and come into the greater view, the God's eye view, the path of heart, where our perceptions are healed, and then we're able to create a different reality. So both Buddhism and shamanism are working with our human minds to help heal us and bring us into that alignment with a greater consciousness that's always about love, interestingly.
Interesting. So, speaking of love, how many other religions or religious traditions or cultures incorporate shamanism?
Oh, that's such a great question. I've often said that Jesus was one of the greatest shamans on planet Earth. I
I
think
can
that
see that. I can
I
see
think
that.
all the religions are working with these same principles, right? Islam, Hinduism, Christianity, Judaism. Um, all the major religions have been working with this idea that our human minds are very powerful and that we are light beings that can, create better situations on Earth, more humane and loving. So, about Jesus being the greatest shaman, uh, a way of defining a shaman is a being who is called to go into the underworld, which is going down to the earth, down into the grave, down into our subconscious, to encounter difficulties, to encounter, things that have hurt us or kept us from the truth of who we are, the shadow, and then getting the gift out of that and transmuting the energy so that then you arise, you come up out of that with a fuller perspective of our union with these great powers or the divine. And so doesn't that sound exactly like what Jesus did?
Certainly the 40 days and 40 nights in the wilderness alone,
That alone, yes, yes.
Right.
And then going into the grave itself and resurrecting. So on some scale, each of our lives are about that journey. It's called the initiatory journey in shamanism, which means you have a calling. That's the first beat of it, to go into your deep unconscious, into the underworld, to encounter this separation, the split inside of ourselves.
So
It's
is that what these brutal shamanic initiations over the ages, is that what it is about, is to shatter a person's reality enough that they can enter the underworld of their consciousness?
yes, right. You've got to be careful who you do go and work with because you want to be able to trust that they're doing it in a way that is healthy enough for you. And sometimes there's too much of a shattering that can go on. But traditionally in shamanic work, you're led carefully, slowly to trust your guide, both your outer person guide, the shaman working with you, and your inner guidance system. So that's what I teach people. It takes a long time sometimes to build up a person's trust again in their own intuition and in their inner relationship with the divine. And that needs to be built up, both, like I'm saying, the trust in the guide and the trust in your inner guidance system. So that when you come to that point of having your ego identity, like you're saying, shattered or opened up, that it's happening in a way that you trust it because you've built up to it gradually and you're in a safe container. So it can be done by psychotherapists or shamans. It can be done too harshly and too taking the person's power away. So it's important that the person goes slowly and feels empowered and feels, safe as they enter that space of the ego deconstruction and then the rebuilding of the ego in a fuller, more whole and healed way.
So what are altered? We speak about this, and we certainly speak about it in combination with shamanism. What are altered states of consciousness?
Right? We're in ordinary reality, and even in ordinary reality, people are perceiving things very differently, but basically there's two divisions of reality when you start to work with shamanism: ordinary reality and the dream time. And the dream time is our nighttime dreams, yes, but it's also being able to be aware of other realities going on simultaneously to this reality. So what is altered consciousness? Well, it's our consciousness, our minds being slightly altered so that we can perceive differently. Like if you think about Carlos Castaneda, he talked about the humans having the assemblage point. That's what Don Juan taught him, that most people have very stuck habitual ways of perceiving things, and that's their stuck assemblage point. So sometimes Don Juan would hit him on the back to wake him up and shift his perception, or sometimes he would give him plant medicines to radically shift his perception. But we can come into altered states without such radical pressures on us in our daily lives as we become more aware, as we meditate and work on calming our mind down and being much more aware, mindful in the present moment. We can go into altered states in, milder ways, in all different ways.
Well, isn't there? I mean, don't we automatically, naturally go into altered states sometimes? Like, say, for instance, daydreaming, or when somebody gets in that groove of deep creativity, aren't
Yes,
those altered states?
yes, definitely. That flow of deep creativity is in. There's a book written about it called the Blue Zone, getting into the blue zone. Where you're in this connected flow with greater consciousness and creativity. And you think about Einstein and geniuses like him, they always gave credit to their altered state, their dream time, that they would get the answers to these puzzles they couldn't solve in the dream time. So having access to altered states is very important for us humans and for our creativity, and especially during these times when we have huge puzzles to solve on planet Earth, right?
Boy, do we ever.
We
So,
really need to go there.
what is psychonavigation?
Okay, psycho-navigation. You can hear in the combination there of words. Psycho is about the psyche, which has been used to refer to both the conscious and unconscious mind. And navigation is, a sailor, someone who's navigating the seas. So to learn psycho-navigation, you're learning to navigate your own psyche, your own mind.
So, where does we were talking about two different things, like going into our mind, into our psyche, and then we're also talking about the unified field and journeys and finding information outside of ourselves. How do the two of those go together?
Great question. So how do we have access to the unified field? Through ourselves, though, right? So we have to enter into altered states through our minds. So there are maps of consciousness that exist in ancient cultures that I've studied into deeply, and then they give us general guidance, and then we have to go into our own psyches and discover our own inner maps of consciousness. So this is what I teach people in the journey to completion. It's a slow process of taking the person on drumming journeys and altered state induction through plant medicines and through dreams, so that you have access to your inner maps within you, and you step by step learn how to navigate your own psyche, so that you can be a guide to others too, and learn your own inner map. But lots of people jump into wanting to be guides for others without ever having really explored their own inner mapping. Yeah, go ahead.
It sounds like you work shamanically quite a bit. Where did you train?
Oh, well, first of all, I was blessed to grow up with my lineage that had my grandparents moved to the Seneca Iroquois Reservation in the years of the Depression era, and my grandmother was a doctor, and they also had a grocery store, and they served the native people and became deep friends with them and got adopted into the tribe. So I was lucky to grow up as a child in a very bicultural way. So that conditioned me to be, seeking of and open to the shamanic pathways or the indigenous, earth-based, creation-centered spiritualities. So in my youth and 20s, that led me to wanting to be with native tribes all over the country. So I moved around the United States and studied with many different tribal elders, in the West and the Southwest, and like the Navajo, Hopi, Lakota, Yurok, etc. And then I was able to venture into Mexico and South America, and this was in the early days before the internet or those ways of connecting, just by writing letters and by word of mouth. I would go and find shamanic teachers in South America, Bolivia, Peru, Brazil.
Well, it's time for us to take yet another station break. Norma and I will be right back to continue our discussion, so stay right there. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org.
I've been broken, shattered, cast to the wind. I am scattered upon the wind. I've been broken, shattered, cast to the wind. I am scattered.
So, how do I drive this thing? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. With us discussing navigating unseen realms is Norma Burton. Her website, normaburton.com. Norma, let's talk about intention. Why is it so important in psychonavigation?
Intention is everything, said Carlos Castaneda, and that's what I was taught by my various shamanic teachers, that we have to spend time getting clear on what our intention is, because the intention that you set will be accomplished, even if you set it unconsciously or without much thought or consideration. It will be accomplished. So intention is very important. And in the teachings that I was trained in from the Huichol, who I worked with, my teacher Guadalupe de los Rios, for over 20 years, her training me in carefully setting the intention. She taught me that the intention always has two parts to it, and a lot of people don't realize this. You think about intention, I want this as a goal. Well, that's called the positive part of it. But there's also the negative or the shadow part of the intention. You have to be willing to grapple with the things that have blocked you from achieving that thing that you want so badly. They come in a package deal where you've got to be willing to say, I must have this, but therefore I'm willing to look into the shadow of this and to heal my inner wounds around this so that I can achieve that intent. So the intent has those two parts to it.
Rats, you're telling me we have to work for this?
Right?
So how much of our intention is unconscious?
Well, don't you think that a lot of people go throughout life pretty much completely unconscious intentions that are achieving what they're putting out there all the time. And then they wonder why the same thing is repeating itself over and over again, because they're putting out that same intention without being aware of it. So a lot of spiritual work, right? The spiritual practices are about becoming aware of what you're intending. Like one time I worked with a wonderful teacher from Burma, U Pandita. We were doing a 30-day silent retreat. And once a week, you'd have an interview with him in which he'd tell you a very important thing that you were to work on. And so for me, he said, when you pick up your fork to eat food, be very mindful of how you're placing your fork and how you're aiming it and what you're picking up. And I thought, wow, I've waited all this time for that. That seems so simplistic and so ordinary. But then, wow, I still remember it to this day because it was such a profound teaching of how are we not focusing our intent, how we so carelessly pick up our fork or do so many things throughout the day. So that kind of deep meditation training I went through for years and years of honing my ability to understand what I'm intending and then stop intending things I don't want to happen and really intend carefully what I do want to happen. So we have to work with, pulling back our minds from our carelessness and becoming so mindful so that we can intend clearly.
But even beyond mindfulness, how much of our intention is coming from our damage, our fears,
Right.
or assumed solutions to problems that don't exist?
Oh, right. Isn't that so true that we cast our perceptions out onto other people all the time and we perceive they're doing mean things to us, when perhaps it's really just our habitual perception in our wounded place that's conditioning how we're seeing everything around us. So that's the purpose of the journey to completion, is going inside into our deep unconscious and finding the patterns of these wounds and going all the way to the inception point of the wound where it began, which is most often in our childhood, where certain damaging, difficult things happened, and then we develop a whole way of feeling and perceiving reality based on that wound. And so what is a wound? But it's another human misusing power in a way that was careless or intentional, but hurting us with a misuse of power. So we have to heal those misuses of power that happen to us. Why? So that we don't misuse power, because we will. We'll misuse power in the same way we were taught. So like you're saying, we misperceive the people out there and project our hurts onto them and then recreate those conditions. So it all comes back to healing ourselves. In shamanism, I call it Shamanism 101, which means taking self-responsibility.
The buck stops here. Stops here. Is that what you're saying?
Right.
So we're very limited by our inability to take responsibility for our own experience.
Right. If we don't take responsibility, we will be forever perpetuating these patterns of woundedness. That's why I really believe that every human has the destiny here to heal these wounded things that have happened maybe for generations and to make the buck stop here. In my lifetime, this lineage of pain can stop because I will heal this wounded place and bring through a perception of love and wholeness and forgiveness and healing of these ways of behaving.
So what are the pitfalls of exploring altered spaces?
Oh, that's a great question too, because you want to think that, it is our human birthright, so it should be safe to go there. But the psyche is guarded, protected by self-defense mechanisms for a reason. We have to go carefully to unlock these wounded places. So one of the pitfalls is going too quickly, rushing in where angels fear to tread, and pressuring our setup inside of ourselves that's been set up to protect us. and dismantling those defense mechanisms too quickly. And then a person can go into a very scared place, become paranoid. Actually, I've counseled many people that have, like gone to shamans in the Amazon and had too much deconstruction of their defense mechanisms too quickly, and they become psychotic. And that means too split. They're too split between what is ordinary reality and what is their perception. So it's very important to go carefully and at a slow enough pace. And I'm of the opinion that a lot of people nowadays are rushing too much to grasp onto psychedelics and taking them too often, too frequently, without integrating the material that arises. So that's why in the recent writing that we've been doing, we're telling people that in ancient cultures, there was a much slower approach, and you weren't allowed to do psychedelics until you'd had a lot of training in navigating through your dreams and through drumming journeys to find this, these patterns inside of yourself gradually, so that when you did the altering substances, you'd be ready for the revelations that come and be able to make use of them.
So, how does one integrate their experience from trance states? I mean, we're if we go into a trance state, it's like a dream state, I understand. Ergo, you're dealing in symbology and metaphors and allegories. How does one integrate that into their daily lives, and what's the value of doing so?
Right, integration is a big topic now in the realms of psychedelic therapy. Um, well, for one thing, because people haven't been taking enough care with integration. But integration actually begins before the journey, not just after, right? So you have to start slowly with your psyche and be able to explore these splits that are inside of us, these wounded places, and allow your psyche to bring them up in timing that's of a pace that's right for you. So it begins by that slowed down, careful process of allowing a more mindfulness, and then being held in a gradual healing of your trauma wounds. And then um, when you then see the inception point and the wounded place in you that was caused a long time ago, you're able to receive what I call receive the gift out of it, which I have a certain way of doing that actually then dismantles that setup in your brain between perceiving the enemy out there and yourself as the victim. That ends, and you're able to receive the empowerment back, receive your power back, and take that power and then step it out in your daily life so that you're acting differently. You're changing a habit pattern, and that takes time. They used to say it took 6 months to change a habit pattern, but I've seen that it actually takes longer than that, probably at least a year, to really thoroughly integrate the message, this new power, and day by day, interaction by interaction, change that habit pattern. So again, it's a spiritual practice. Integration is a walk that you take on that takes time. But when you do it thoroughly, you really shift your personality. You really heal and become a more whole, a better person. That's what integration is.
So when we engage in a shamanic journey, and it's my understanding that it's the minority of shamanic practices that use plant medicine. So if we're not going to be using plant medicine and we're engaging into a shamanic trance state, how does one get there?
Right. Traditionally, all over the world, this open back called water drum has been used to induce the trance state. Now there's been a lot of scientific study done about it too, how the particular rhythm at a certain megahertz brings about a certain rhythm in the brain that aligns the brain with what's called the earth channel. So you're actually coming down to an alpha state and being able to be both awake. You're still awake in ordinary reality, but you're also in this lucid trance state. So the drum induces this trance state that's very conducive to a lucid experience that's extremely similar to a lucid dream experience. So your brain is available turned on in a certain way to receive messages. So it's not just your imagination. So the drumming trance state is an awakening of a connection between your mind and a greater consciousness. That's why all over the world, shamanic teachings worked with power animals, with animal consciousness that you encounter to be a guide for you and help you. So it's not just a woo-woo new age creation to talk about power animals. It's an ancient practice of forming this intimate relationship with otherness, with other beingness. And the particular animal brings particular gifts of their nature to a person at a particular time that they need. And you don't just skip from one power animal to another. Either you build a long-term relationship with one over many years and learn its ways very intimately. So we need to be guided from within. And it's an ancient setup to teach you how to give the test of 4.
We're going to have to take another station break.
Okay.
Please stay with us as Norma and I continue to explore lucid dreaming, trance journeys, and altered states. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org.
Brilliant feathers of an unearthly hue glide by on the edge of his dream.
Can I get lost in an altered state? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're continuing our discussion with Norma Burton, her website, normaburton.com. So, Norma, in the last segment, you were talking about how we need guidance, whether it's a power animal or a shamanic elder or something, when we're starting to navigate the dreamscape or the alternative reality. Um, so, what kind, is that because we can get lost there?
It's a humble thing to admit that we need guidance, So that's the traditional teachings all over the world, that humans need to surrender over to a trustworthy guide. So yes, we can get lost there very easily, and people do all the time get lost when they go into altered states because they don't have the proper training about that you're not supposed to go anywhere in the altered state without your guide, your inner guide. So there's a training in how to ascertain who is your inner guide and your power animal. So there's a whole process of learning discernment about that. Lots of times people come to me and say, I went into an altered state with some psychedelic and I encountered all these beings, and how do I know which ones to trust? Well, yes, you're supposed to have training before just popping in there in developing a relationship with your trustworthy guide, and then you learn discernment about other beings that come into the space, because they do. So that's one way to get lost, and people get lost in ordinary reality all the time too, right? By following cult leader type beings that are there in an alluring way, but to take over their consciousness and their power. So yes, we've got to learn discernment and be trained in developing this relationship within, with the I-thou relationship, which Martin Buber, the Jewish philosopher, talked about, that I-thou relationship. When you go into the dream time, even in your nighttime dreams, and you might, experiment with your power there and altering reality, you will encounter the fact that there is another power there, that you're not alone. You're not just allowed to do anything in the dream time. Same in ordinary reality. We have a lot of hubris or pride as humans, thinking that we can do anything we want when we gain certain powers or awarenesses. But no, we are interacting with other forces, other beings, and power. So the whole shamanic path is about learning to walk humbly and also impeccably with power.
So that, we see right now a lot of misuse of power, a lot of unconscious use of power. What are going to be the ramifications of all that going on? I mean, it seems to be more so now than any time in my lifetime.
Right. So much delusion by people buying into leaders that are misusing power. And right, what are the implications, right? They're huge for our planet. So yeah, the misuse of power is probably what would we say the core human sin, right? Like not tuning in to the I-thou relationship and being in the great harmony for the highest good of all is the way that the Huichol taught it to me. We're supposed to be living here, always tuning in to the interbeingness of our existence and how we are in this great harmony that needs to be maintained and honored so that we can act for the highest good of all. That's what our leaders should be doing. There's so many cults going on nowadays, and I tend to be a therapist who people come to for healing and like deconstructing their dependency on cult leaders and healing them and bringing them back to their own inner empowerment. So yeah, there's a lot of work to be done in our world about teaching people, to have discernment about who they're giving their power over to. But they've been so conditioned by childhood wounding and maybe parents misusing their power to be codependent with a power-grabbing person. So this is a big work of shamanic and Buddhist and spiritual healing, right? Is to heal people so they don't become dependent on people that are going to dominate them.
Talk about a way of disempowering the ones that misuse power is not just not to play, right?
Right, just not to play.
Just not to play. I've heard shaman referred to as frequency masters. Have you heard that? And if so, do you know what it means?
Oh, that's a great term. It's interesting because I always say everything is about energy. So frequency masters. So a shaman is teaching you about energy, and we're being guided to heal our misuse of power, our misuse of energy, so that we can become more and more impeccable, or that means the right use of energy in the moment. So that's becoming a frequency master. I like how you put that. We've got to be aware of how we're using energy and thought energy. It's a big part of that in any particular moment, because energy is everything. Energy is what creates everything around us.
And yet we can't smell it, hear it, see it, unless we have a practice that helps us do that. So most people totally disregard that, don't they? And feel helpless.
Right. And when you think about what you can't see, hear, sense with the five senses, that's why we talk about the sixth sense or extrasensory perception, because we're sensing into the spiritual realms. And those realms we as humans have to interact with. That's who we are. We are set up in both our biology and our mental chemistry to have access to energy realms. I wonder if in the age of Aquarius, we as humans are going to become so much more aware of that fact of who we are in these energy and spiritual realms.
Well, there's certainly a lot of light coming with the age, and I would have to say it's shining into the shadows for sure.
Yes.
What safety or ethical considerations do you advocate in exploring altered states of consciousness?
Safety is so important. There's a way to set up a container for a deep dive into one's psyche that is a safe container. So that's why I constructed the journey to completion process in the way that I have. So one thing that makes for safety is getting clear on your intent. There are three things. The second thing is taking the time to find a guide that is trustworthy. And the third thing is having a map of consciousness. So a worthy guide will show you the map. There are ancient maps of consciousness, and Joseph Campbell went all over the world and discovered these and called it the hero's journey. So we're very familiar now with that term, the hero's journey. But it's a map that shows a human getting a calling to go follow their intent into the underworld to grapple with the demons, so to speak, or the shadow, the difficulties you find there, and then the return. So those three parts are the basic core of a map. So lots of spiritualities won't take you into that permission to go into the underworld and to get the gift from it and return. That's a super important thing to know about safety, that the guide will be telling you you've got to take that kind of journey. But then the guide also needs to be very experienced and trustworthy. They need to have gone on that journey to deal with their own shadow so they're not misusing power. So you need to find guides. There's so many guides out there that do misuse power, so you've got to be careful in who you select to
Well,
be.
there's a lot of people that have taken a weekend workshop and hang out their shingle.
Right? It's
And from what you're saying, it's a huge undertaking to even come close to being in a position to guide yourself, much less others.
it's a huge undertaking. I worked with my Weichel teacher for 20 years before she gave me permission to be a teacher. And it's the same in living in Japan. They scoff at how somebody goes there and studies 3 weeks Aikido and then comes back here and is an Aikido master, you know. So yeah, traditional cultures really take you on a long, deep, thorough process before you ever would get to say that you have the right to teach something. So it's very important to be humble in your approach to your own teaching of anything, but also to seek out teachers who are valid apprentices of these ancient lineages.
So, how can psychonavigation contribute to personal evolution at this time?
Wow, that's what we've been talking about, right? That we need to become good psychonavigators so that we can heal our own microcosm, our inner wounds, so that we are not misusing power and we are therefore using energy in a better way so that we're healing our relationships and our interactions with beings on earth. And then the macrocosm is also affected by the microcosm. Sometimes we have no idea how much our thoughts and our lives are affecting everyone around us, right? But we know that we have a great impact. Our one life has a huge impact on everything around us. That they've proven that, like with the, have you heard about the butterflies flapping their wings in South America affect the weather in China? That type of thing, you know, like we're very interconnected. And so we need to learn good psychonavigation skills so that we can help to heal our societies, our families, and our world. It's the way of healing that needs to take place to become a good navigator of your own psyche.
Well, it's believe it or not, we're getting close to the end of the show, and I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, what's your mission?
Well, this is my mission. I, I feel that I've been blessed with that life that I was explaining, of being able to value my dreams from a young age, and therefore to be able to teach others that the dream time is just as important as our ordinary reality. We have to explore it. We have to become good at working with energy so that we can fulfill our destiny on earth. So that's my mission, is to help others come into contact with the dream time and learn the psychonavigation skills so that we can become better human beings and heal our planet.
That is a beautiful and very worthy mission. Thank you so much for doing it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. The time's gone fast, and what a great conversation. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure, Norma. Unfortunately, we are out of time. We're going to thank Norma for coming on the show, and unfortunately, it's time to quit. Our guest this hour has been Norma J. Burton, the author of Navigating Liminal Realms Psychonavigation Skills for Lucid Dreaming, Trance Journeys, and Altered States. To find out more about Norma, where you can find her book and all she has to offer, visit her website, normaburton.com. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to enjoy past archived episodes, visit www.missionevolution.org. But please be sure to join us right here on the Voice of Canada Broadcast Network, where this mission will continue, bringing information, resources, and support to our rapidly evolving world.